Hi guys, welcome back to our Through Her Eyes podcast. I'm Malia.
I'm Olivia.
And today we're going to be jumping into another one of our topics in our book that will be coming out in just a couple of months. And today we're going to be talking about loss and how we've both experienced loss, and how we've experienced them differently, how we've experienced the same loss but in different ways, just all those conversations.
Yeah. I remember the first time I lost someone that I knew that was close to me, and I want to say 18, 17. It was like my senior year in high school.
Mm-hmm.
And my oldest brother, Sir Earl, passed away from leukemia. He was only 29.
Wow.
And I do remember him going in and out of remission, and so things being fine and everything's great, and I even have a card he wrote me or a letter he wrote me, things are good, and then all of a sudden things weren't good, then they were good, and then all of a sudden they said he had a month or 3 weeks or something like that. And being younger, being 17, I look back and I feel bad that I wasn't more mature.
Yeah.
To really know what that meant.
Mm-hmm.
Because I was on the phone with him in the hospital and we just chit-chatted. He asked me about graduation and college, and we chit-chatted about whatever. And in the back of my mind, I was like, this is probably the last time I'm going to talk to him. Mm-hmm. And he knew that.
Yeah.
And yet we didn't say anything. I don't even know if I said I love you on the phone.
Yeah.
And so when I look back on that, and then fast forward a little bit, you don't remember him, but there's photos of my mom's brother, Bill.
There's a photo that I clearly remember.
My mom's uncle, Bill.
In the basement with Grandma T.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
And he came to visit us.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember Gabe was a baby and I was on a work trip. And he called to say bye, that he was headed to the airport. And something in me, and again, it was just this, it was awkward because I didn't know him well, and or we didn't have like a relationship, but I literally on the phone, I was like, tell him you love him.
Wow.
And that just kept on the phone, kept like in my mind, in my spirit, and I didn't. And he literally hung up the phone, got dropped off at DIA, and had a heart attack in the line.
Oh my God.
To check his bags. And so from that, it took those two losses for me to pay attention to and be obedient to the direction of tell this person you love them, because you don't know if this is going to be the last time you see them.
Wow. That's chilling. It's so hard to understand what that loss is and grief is until you do it for the first time. Because my first loss that I knew, that I remember, is Miss Tobias.
Mm-hmm.
She was my music teacher at my charter school, first grade all the way up to 7th grade. And I remember being in my homeroom class, and all of a sudden we were talking about cancer. And I was like, we're not in science class, like why are we talking about cancer? And we get told that Miss Tobias had ovarian cancer. And that was something that was just so foreign to us. Like there was no one in our family that had cancer that I was consciously aware about. And so it was a very distant feeling of, oh, she has cancer, but she's going to be okay. And I didn't understand that there could be an option that's not that way until I think we had like 2 snow days back to back, and that's when we got told that she passed. And coming back to school was just such an out-of-body thing of like she wasn't there anymore. And she didn't quit.
Just there.
She was there, and then she wasn't. And she was such a bright light in so many kids' lives. There's still some people I talked to that went to Highline and knew Miss Tobias. So she was such an amazing person. And for her to just be gone was just so hard.
It's unreal. Like
it's unreal.
You can't wrap your head around it.
And then to go back to school, and that was right around Literacy Day that I started at Highline. And so I was asked to give my Literacy Day speech that I've done every year in the same ceremony that we're remembering her. So I'm like, how do I do my speech and am able to speak it and am able to celebrate reading while we're also celebrating a life? And what does that look like? What does giving balloons away look like? Like, I don't know. I don't understand. And my second big loss was Grandma T. And I was physically in the hospital for that one, which was a whole nother level of loss. That was my first family loss. To how do I support myself? How do I support grandma? Because I was with grandma and you weren't there. Gabe wasn't there. Dad wasn't there. So it was like, how do I process what I just saw, heard, witnessed? How do I support grandma who just lost her mom? And that's this experience that I hope I don't experience anytime soon. And just that grief that webs in and out. And Grandma T wasn't conscious when she passed. So I think Pastor was there and he was like, talk to her, tell you love her. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't because that it meant that it was over. She couldn't hear me. She couldn't say anything back to me. I didn't even know what I wanted to say or what I wanted to hear from her.
I think they can hear. Like, I really do believe that they can hear that.
In that final, and it's such a hard thing because Grandma T was in so much pain that final stretch.
She was tired.
She was so tired.
I remember she passed away in May, but her birthday in January. And I was like, happy birthday, Grandma. She's like, it is? She's like, it's my birthday again. She was like, man, I'm just tired. I think she was ready to go. But I also truly believe, I was just telling somebody this, that I personally believe that she needed permission a little bit because Grandma T's mom lived to be 100. And Grandma T told you and me, like, I'm going to live to be 100.
And that's such a cool thought to have.
Well, but I think she made the promise for us for some random reason. And you would have been 21. You would have been turning 20 or 21.
No, because she was 97 when she passed.
Right.
And I was in freshman year of high school. She would have been there for my high school graduation, not my college. Yeah.
Okay.
I would have been 18.
I don't math.
But I did have that thought of just like, oh my gosh, Grandma T can be around for my high school graduation.
And I think she needed us to tell her, you do not have to be here until you are 100. You are good.
You're tired.
You have done all the things. Yeah. You have seen all the things to experience, like, moments in time in your great-granddaughter and great-grandson's lives.
And a good chunk of it. Like, I was 15 when she passed. Like, she still was still such an impact of my life. It wasn't just that I was 3 and she passed. Like, she was still such a monumental part of my life. And I remember I had a youth group the night before that night. And I remember she was in hospice, and one of my prayer requests was like, you guys, my great-grandma's not doing so well. She's in the hospice, so I'm just like, Lord, like, heal her, help her feel better. Went to grandma's that night, woke up at midnight to go to hospice.
I'm glad you said that, because a lot of times, and this is in life, not just in loss, but we pray.
Yeah.
And the prayer was, heal her, make her feel better. And God was like,
okay. Literally hours later is when
I will.
And just how it all came to pass, because I was talking about grandma about that whole night, and originally she had come in the room I was staying in to give me a note that where she was going, and I woke up as soon as she walked into the room.
And I was out of town,
so there was the potential for not only to me not have been there, but for grandma to have been alone in those final moments, because we had pastor and they visited, but it was just me and grandma when she finally passed. So it's so interesting whenever I think about certain events and how we think they're gonna go, and God has a plan so much bigger and so much, like, he's taking such good care of us. So even if what we think is best for Grandma T, be like, please just make her feel better, he's just like, no, it's time for her to come home. Well, and I never would have guessed that would have been the night.
But that kind of was my prayer, only because in the last, 8 years of Grandma T's life,
man,
there were moments where I was like, this is it. Like, this is, and then she just bounced back, and
I call it, like, I was like, great grandma is my bounce ball. Like, she would bounce back the hospice.
I think she was tired.
She was like, why am I keep bouncing back?
I think to your point of, like, God watches over us and kind of orchestrates things. I believe it is truly an incredible blessing to be there when someone takes their last breath. The last breath is in a second, in an instant. Think about how many people you know have passed and you hear about it later.
Yeah.
But to physically be there, and I think for me that's only happened one time, and it was really truly unplanned and shocking. And being part of the church that we were a part of, I would go to the hospital a lot. We would, rotate and go visit people from the church, or I've gone to so many funerals because you are representing, the church, whatever. And a couple years ago, about a year, I'm so bad with years, so I'm not even gonna say. I'm gonna stop.
A time passed from
not
today.
Too long ago. I had been trying to go see Aunt Teeny, and when I had gone, she was asleep, or I missed people. I had, tried to go pastor. I missed pastor, and trying to go in between work. And then I finally made it, and I was the only one in the room.
Wow.
Actually, her husband was in the room, and then he had left to go get a haircut. And he said to her, "I'll be right back. I'm gonna go get my haircut. I'll be right back." So I was the only one in the room, and I just sat there, just knowing that I don't know when I'd be back, and I had been trying to go, and she, wasn't awake, wasn't responsive. It was in hospice. It's like, man, the days I've spent in that same hospice for so many people, but she wasn't responsive, and I was holding her hand, and I probably was there for 20 minutes maybe, and all of a sudden she opened her eyes, she squeezed my hand, she looked over at me, and looked like she was trying to say something, and then she was breathing, and then she took her last breath. And I was sitting there wait, did that just happen? Is what I think happened just happened? And I just was in disbelief. There's no way that was it. And so the nurse came in, and I was like, I think she just passed. And the nurse was like, well, let's check her pulse, and is she breathing? And I was leaning up, I've never checked to see if somebody was breathing before. And she had passed, and I called pastor, and I feel horrible because in my shock of the situation, and I don't know that I would use the word panic, but shock of the situation, I called her brother, and I was like, she just took her last breath without the lens and the weight of, because this is my pastor. And this is pastor who goes through death, who has walked through death with me and my mom and us so many times, has seen death so many times, has been in the hospital so many times, has prayed over, done eulogies. And I think in my mind, because he is such a pro and he's done it so many times, I forgot this is his sister. And so I feel like I was just insensitive in the way I delivered the news.
Well, it's grief is such and loss in that moment is something that is so, again, out of body, that how do you react to that? And to your point of being in that last moment, I think there is beauty with it, but I have trauma from being at Grandma T's, of being there in the exact moment when life started without her. And I was asleep, I was sitting in one of the chairs, and I woke up to her not breathing. The fact of her not breathing, that is what woke me up at 4 whatever in the morning. And so to be there with her and to be there with Grandma, I truly treasure, but it's also being that I was physically there for that moment at 15, and it being my first family loss. It just took it was such a day of disbelief and heartache to almost watch it happen. But how do you comprehend that I got the call at the high school that our family friend passed? And how does Dad say that to me? And how do I respond to that? And that's such a, it's such a, you can't wrap your head around it. And it's not something that you can, 2 months later, good. Or 1 year later, you're good.
And it feels very unfair, especially with that loss, because he was so young.
Yeah, that was, I talked about this in our our faith podcast. But the family friend of mine passed when he was, I believe he was 14. He was 13 or 14. And he passed of brain cancer. And he was such a joy. He was such a bright light. And for him to, in my eyes, have done nothing wrong. He was just living his life with his family. Gets cancer. And I'm like, okay, God, I'm praying for you to please heal him and take this away from him. He's dying. And then he dies. And we have that final moment. We go to his house to go talk, and we don't talk anything about the fact that he can barely respond to us or that he can barely see us. And then to get that call, how I couldn't process how I could go to church that following Sunday. Because I'm just like, what did I do wrong? What did he do wrong? Because I prayed.
Did we not pray enough?
And I trusted you.
Yeah.
And that family is not as religious as we are, but they had faith as well. And for him to be just starting out living life, who has an older brother and who has family, and to just be like, I couldn't process how God allowed that. And so that was a big separation for me and God to understand why that happened, why that occurred, and if he's all knowing and all powerful, he allowed that, and then all of his other children are just left here to just feel that and grieve it and live through it and process it. And so that's a time and that's a person that I still haven't fully understood and that I still haven't fully gotten over. And my heart always, I think about him almost every day of, again, the life that I'm now living since that phone call that is without him.
I think it's a good thing that you haven't gotten over it. Like, I don't want to get over. I don't want to get over losing people we love. Now, do I want to wear it differently? Absolutely. Cherish it differently. Move through grief and its stages and processes differently. Yes, but for me, like, the thought of grief completely going away, it's like, man, then have I forgotten this person?
It's, have I forgotten them? And if my grief is fully gone, then is my love for them gone? Because we were talking about the quote the other day that we wanted to say here that we love. If you've probably heard it, but just that grief is your love for that person with nowhere to go.
Yeah. And the fact that we have grief is actually a testament to the relationship we had with that person. Less grief, less relationship, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, I remember the first day that I went a full day without thinking about my dad and how hurtful that was.
I remember you called me about that at one point, of just how you didn't fully think about it, and just even that own loss and grief of itself, of not thinking about them for a full day.
And again, different level of relationship, different level of grief, but there was a long time, and I can't even say if it was like 2 years, I don't remember, where every day, almost every moment, everything, every song, like songs that I wouldn't even, I don't know, think about. I'm like, wow, this is my dad's favorite song. Or this song reminds me of my dad, or this, where I just think about him, or just like even a shadow, like just a slight glimpse of grief.
Yeah.
And one day I went to bed, and I remember, and I woke up the next morning and I was like, I didn't grieve yesterday.
Wow.
And how I didn't feel good about it. But it also meant that, time was passing and life was moving on, and that the grief could look different.
Yeah, grief evolves, and grief is something that grows with you, I feel like, as you start to experience more and do more. And I feel like grief is something that doesn't go away, and it shouldn't. Like we said, that's the love that we have for that person. But at some point, it is something that can be lifted off a little bit and not as heavy.
Not as heavy.
Yeah. And so that's depending on how we all process it and just how we go through life, of hopefully that the grief is always still there, that love is always still there, but it's not as heavy. It's not as much as a burden that you're like carrying on your shoulders versus a more of maybe acceptance and loving for that person while still being grief and not being hunched over so heavy, so tired with the grief.
Right. I've been trying to be more mindful of this, and it's definitely a practice. You definitely have to be intentional, and it's hard for me. But this is what I'm trying to do. I'm telling y'all this. It's very hard for me to do. Is when grief sets in, instead of taking, it's like holding this thing, grief, and it's heavy, like you said.
Holding space
for grief.
And it's
heavy and it's sad. And the thought that is in my head is, I miss this person. I'm sad they're not here. I'm upset of the way they passed. I'm upset that their life was cut short. I'm upset that they were unhappy and felt like they couldn't be here anymore. I'm sad because of the life they're missing. I'm sad of the life I'm missing with them. And that's just like what. And then I sit with it. I cry. I change the music because the music keeps me crying.
Music is sad.
And then I move on, right? And I'm like, okay, I just did that little bit, that grief, and I'm going to move. But this is what I'm trying to do. It's flipping. I'm so glad they were in my life.
Yeah.
Their smile was amazing. Instead of I missed their smile.
Yeah.
Their smile was amazing. I remember their laugh, their joy. Like, what a great person. What a great life. What a great impact on me. I celebrate them. So grief goes from sad to celebrate.
Yeah.
In that moment.
Yeah.
So instead of the sad song that I'm crying to, is there a song that I can literally get up and dance to because I'm celebrating that person? It's hard.
Oh yeah, super hard. Because it is so much easier to keep that sadness that's with that loss instead of having to force your heart to view it differently. It's so much easier to just sit in it and just feel it, and not have to change it into something else. Because it also kind of feels like you're moving on. Like I feel like when I've done that,
and that's sad too.
It's so sad that when I'm trying to flip the narrative and trying to be joyful of this person in my life, it's a part of my brain is just like, by doing this, you're forgetting them, which is so not true.
Yeah.
But that is a thought that would creep into my head when I try to do that, of just like, by changing the narrative, you're maybe changing what happened or changing that they left and forgetting what happened, which is something that with loss and the people in your life, that never goes away. You never forget that.
Right.
But it's trying to move forward in that and keeping that love a special thing versus a hurtful thing, right. I guess.
Right. There's something that I'm really aware of in this notion of generational narratives and generational stories that literally end with a person.
Yeah. Because
those stories weren't passed on. And this is just a tiny, tiny example, but as an example, Grandma Harris, Grandma T's mom, used to make these potato rolls. I feel like my first exposure to these potato rolls was probably when I was 6 or 7, and then when I was 10 and I could actually remember and be involved, help her make these potato rolls, and then eating them. And then when we went back to DC and visited her when I was 17, 18, these potato rolls, oh my gosh. And what was so great is they're the type of, I mean, if you've ever made bread, it's time intensive, it's a science, you got to be very specific on your measurements, and then you let it rise, and then you all these things, right? So even when we visited and it wasn't Christmas or Thanksgiving, which is usually when these rolls were made, she would make them. And then Grandma T, when Grandma Harris passed away, Grandma T would make them. Grandma T knew the recipe, but the recipe wasn't the making, I won't say the recipe, the making wasn't passed on to my mom.
Oh, wow.
Which then wasn't passed on to me.
Is the recipe still intact, or was it not written down between Grandma T and
this is why I corrected myself, is that at one point in time, and people, you don't measure stuff, and you don't have that I put 2 cups of flour and I do this, and then the yeast but recipes weren't written.
Yeah.
So we finally kind of forced or pushed Grandma T to write the recipe down.
Right.
But I honestly, truly believe that she was like, I could just see her eyes rolling, like, fine, I'll write this thing down.
Oh, yeah.
And just kind of like throwing stuff on a page and just not being as exact of, especially if you've done something over and over. I'm sure this is with your writing because you write all the time.
Yeah.
If you were to tell someone your writing process, I'm sure or write down your writing process.
How do you even do that?
Look at your face.
Please don't ask me to do that.
If you were to write down your writing process, one, you'd be like, crap. Two, you'd be like, okay, well, I'll just jot this down. But because it's your process, it's in your head.
And it wasn't taught to grandma the way
then you probably didn't write it down with enough detail to actually hand it off for someone else to do.
Yeah.
Because it's your thing. You're like, oh, I didn't even think about writing this piece because it just becomes natural.
Yeah.
So anyway, the recipe got on paper. It wasn't probably as complete. And so I've tried to make this recipe maybe like 3 or 4 times.
And it doesn't taste.
It tastes horrible. Like it doesn't even taste. I mean, it tastes like it has just a lot of yeast in it, and it's not as buttery, and it's so bad. And then I wait like 5 years, and I'm like, all right, I'm gonna do this again. And I do it again. It tastes bad.
How long has it been since you last tried?
I don't. It's probably been 6 or 7 years. So then I'm like, I'm telling my mom, like, Mom, maybe you should try it. Because she's never made it before.
Oh, wow.
But again, Grandma T is gone. Grandma Harris is gone. And so while butter or potato rolls isn't that big of a deal, I think about heritage. I think about, immigrant families who don't have the story of how their great-grandparents came here. Or there's just so much that then is missing. And then once that final person dies who has that knowledge, it's lost.
And it's memory and tradition. I came home this past couple for winter break. I came home, and I'm never here for Thanksgiving since I've been in college, and I wasn't going to be here for Christmas either. So I was like, Dad, can we please make Thanksgiving food while I was just here? And he was like, but what about the Friendsgiving you had? And I was like, no, I want my family's food. I want my dad's greens. I want the sweet potato casserole, and I want the bean pie. Don't even come for me. The best thing ever. My favorite part of the holidays. But we took the time to sit and make those recipes, and some of those recipes you can only have in my family at a certain age. So I finally been given the bean pie recipe. You have to be 21 to have it. That's what Grandma said. I know.
What?
I did.
How did I not know any of this? I didn't know there was an age.
Talk to your mother about it.
Grandma gave it to you or Dad gave it to you?
I texted Grandma last winter, and I was just like, or 2 winters ago, I guess, when we're filming this, and was like, Grandma, I'm about to turn 21. Can I have the recipe? And she was like, yes, but it has to stay within the bloodline because.
Why is there a 21 thing?
I don't know.
That is so funny.
Anyways, but and then.
Like there's no alcohol in the pie. Or
right.
No...
2 winters ago, I watched my dad make it, and then this past winter, I now have the recipes on my phone.
Well, you know what is so great about that, and I will say this about your dad, is he has carried that tradition on.
He and traditions, which I'm so thankful
so long, which is I'm thankful for too, because Grandma May, whose sister had a bean pie business in Georgia, and that's how we got this recipe, and it's only in the family. Grandma May is gone.
Yep.
Aunt Anissa is in late 90s, 98.
Yeah.
So, and I don't make bean pies. I feel like I've made them several times, but years and years and years ago. So the fact that in my family's tradition, your dad has now kept that as his family tradition.
And he was brought in. Like that's not his.
I love that because I know, and now you have the recipe. It's going to carry on.
It's so important to me. Yeah, I was like, I want to be able to learn this. I watched him. I stayed up until like 11:30 because I wanted to see how my dad made it.
He's a master.
And how he puts it all together. And I know the first time I'm going to make it, it's not going to be perfect. And then with the recipe cards, it's so cool because they look like they've been used for years. And Dad's like, I need to rewrite them. And I was just like, I need to find my own cards and make my own cookbook. And those 2 days randomly, early December.
Card has probably been around since before you were born.
Man. And I want to keep those cards as long as I can. Like that is so important to me because of the stories and the family that have been kept in it. And whatever Friendsgiving, whatever Southern food I got to have is great. But I was like, no, every year I want to have my family's food. It means so much to me. Not just is it amazing, because it is, but the fact that it is my family's tradition. It is what we do every year. It's been passed down. Like that is very important to me. And so especially through that loss, every loss, especially in that generation that you were talking about, is a loss of memories. It's a loss of tradition if you're not very intentional with the things that you did. Like even with other traditions over the years, my dad will work so hard to put them together, and we're all busy and we're all older and we can't do it, and he'll push and push and push, and when we finally get it done, and it's not the same as it used to be, I'm like, Dad, thank you, because there's a reason we've been doing this over a decade. It's because someone pushes them for that, and now I can keep doing it with my kids. We could have just let it drop years ago when I left for college or whatever. Those are just so important.
There's this notion of in tradition and memory is also legacy. And how do you leave something behind that is tangible for the next generation and the next generation? And so going back to Queen's Quill Publishing and thinking about making sure that we are telling generational narratives, especially as Black women, telling generational narratives as well, and just the whole notion around this book of being able to put in, I mean, who wants to know about our life? Like, I don't know, hopefully you all buy the book, but this is really like,
this is our lives, and it's our story and legacy that can be passed down for my children. It's passed down. It's stories of Black women that these perspectives can be grown upon and learned from in general with the people who read it. And so it becomes more than just my children or even Gabe's children. It then becomes, as Black women, as just women, like that story, as a mother and daughter story of other mothers and daughters be able to take this and start that as a sharing moment with their families. Like it becomes so much bigger than us, which I think is part of the reason why we're so excited about it.
Part of the reason why we did it, and we're so excited about it. When my dad passed away, there was a huge realization of legacy or lack of legacy. He had an incredible life before I was born, and I didn't know a lot about that life. And so when he passed away, and putting together like his, it was during COVID, so putting together his memorial service and all of that stuff, it was going to be virtual, and I just wanted to find as many artifacts as I possibly could. Like, what can I scrounge around and grab and get? And unfortunately, in the 60s, 70s, there wasn't a lot of, I can't just go to his Facebook page and pull photos and videos from that time. Like, so it was actually a lot harder to pull things, and I couldn't find as much video as I wanted. And he has writings and books and like things that he has actually put on paper and written out that we have. We don't know what to do with it exactly yet, but we have it. And so it literally sparked me to create my podcast, God is CEO, because the biggest thing for me, and if you've lost a loved one, is to hear their voice. It's like, wow, can I gain knowledge now? Can I learn more about this person and who they were? So I started the podcast, but in pulling together bits and pieces of him, I literally had to go to newspapers to get articles and go to eBay to find some random photographer who happened to take pictures at a karate tournament. And so I have this desire to create tangible things that I can leave behind when I'm no longer here. For you, for Gabe, and your kids.
Also, loss and the idea of you leaving stuff behind for me and Gabe is a thought that I don't really want to think about.
I know.
So,
but I think about that all the time.
Oh yeah, no, for sure, and I'm sure that I would gain the same level of emotion and thought towards that once I have kids. And no.
I think the last loss I want to talk about is my little sister, Sylvia. And just, I knew this was going to be really hard.
I know.
The forgiveness it takes, the level. Oh no!
Loss has grabbed you by the throat. Take a deep breath.
And we don't even have anything.
To be fair, in other podcasts, we have had little.
We always have coffee.
Just it's really
today
early right now, so we don't have it yet. Our apologies.
The level of forgiveness it takes to forgive someone for taking their own life. That is hard. And I forgive my sister more, I feel like, than I forgave my dad. Because with my dad, I'm like, you're a freaking adult. You've gone through so much. You've put people through so much pain. You've like, and to go out like that, like just to be like, I'm done.
Yeah.
But then the more I learned about him and the more I sat with it, the more I prayed about it, I got glimpses into, like, literally, I felt like the Lord was talking to me about him and saying,
Yeah.
this is, I was like, what was he feeling in those last minutes? Was he sad? Was he relieved that it was going to be over soon? Was he scared? I know he was alone. Like, how alone did he really feel? And just all of those things. And I think with my sister, I think it was easier for me to forgive her because she was physically around me a lot. And I could see and sense and talk to her about what she was really going through. But then I had to forgive myself for, um, not always saying the things that I should have said, good, bad, and different. Maybe not even being the tough love older sister that I know I probably should have been in certain situations. But then also relinquishing this notion of I could have done something.
Yeah, I feel that way with everybody in my life who have taken their own life, which has mainly been your dad and my aunt and my grandpa. But also, when I was in high school, we had 2, 3, maybe 4 people, students who took their lives while I was a student with them. And none of those students I knew, and yet it was such an overwhelming sense of, could I have done more? I was in student council. Could I have somehow, some way, done more for those students with my aunt, with your sister, when we were around her? Could I have done anything? And it's such a hard question that as humans, like, that doesn't go away, but it's something that we all have to forgive ourselves because there was only so much that we could have done.
Yeah.
And so much love that we could have given. And with those students at my school, like, I didn't know any of them. So what truly could I have done? So it's just that I know I can only imagine because I had to forgive myself with those students and with my family members. So I can only imagine that process of forgiveness for yourself as well.
And I think this also, in addition, I'd always go back to, like, didn't he know that I loved him? But didn't he love me enough to stay? Didn't he love his kids enough to stay? Didn't he love his grandkids enough to stay? And when it really comes down to it, it's not about that at all.
It's never about that, unfortunately, because so many stories come out of dads, of moms, of people with a lot of family and a lot of love there. And it's always that question of just like, why didn't they love these people enough to stay? But there's so much pain there that they were going through that we usually never see with people who take their lives. And so it's just like, I'm sure they loved us with a lot of people, but that hurt was so big. Like, I can't imagine.
It's big, and it's not even, like, honestly, it's not fully rational. It's not fully rational. And anyone who has dealt with, like, deep depression and mental illness knows that the thoughts aren't always logical and sane.
Yeah, for sure.
And I do remember thinking, like, well, didn't my sister know I loved her? Maybe she didn't know I loved her. And God just had, like, me and God had, like, so many, we still do, but just so many deep conversations and just downpours, which takes, for me, a lot of, we talk about it in faith, takes a lot of quieting my mind and stillness, because I'm always on the go. I'm always doing, if you know me, even if my plate isn't full, I make it full.
Yeah.
So that I don't have time to really sit and process. It's sad. But when I do make time to sit and process, I feel like God does a lot of talking and a lot of downloads. And a lot of those downloads around Sylvia was reassurance and confirmation that she did know I loved her. And that did not solve her problem and what she was going through.
Which sucks. Like, that's just like, how do you
And not to think that I'm just me, like I'm just Olivia. It's not like my love can keep someone here, but no one's love can really keep anyone here. I think, I believe it can keep someone here longer, for sure. But yeah, the depths that I have kind of gone to study suicide and mental illness and depression to really truly understand it, because it is so live and prevalent in my family. And touches me in so many different ways. And I deal with depression and battle depression as well. And I do remember with things going on with around that time, and with Gabe, and me trying to be the super mom and just hold it all together. I wasn't practicing what I preached, because I was all about like I remember taking Gabe to the doctor and being like, he needs to get on antidepressants because he needs something. And I am sitting there struggling, not on antidepressants. And I lost my dad and my sister to suicide. And now my son is going through this. And it's like, what am I thinking that like, I didn't think I was immune to it. I was just like, save everybody else. This is like the typical mom response of, I'm going to save everyone in this boat first, then I'm going to save myself.
But then you drown, Mom.
And y'all, I don't even know how to swim. But the fact that,
oh my gosh,
I know that was random, but
I mean, but it's something that I do with too. I'm a people pleaser. I make sure everybody else in my life is okay before even looking at what I'm going through. And so I understand that truly, of wanting to make sure everyone else. I remember you giving me the call and you waiting, and we talked about this in another podcast, of waiting to tell me to protect me and to make sure that I was okay. But I was still at school, so then I still dealt with it. And then I got home, and with that season with Gabe, that holiday season was one of the most terrifying seasons of my life. I would sit in the car at Tattered Cover, because that's where I worked at the time, in Pascal, and bawl my eyes out because I was terrified, and I wanted to do something, but I didn't know what to do, because I love Gabe with all my heart, and I'm just like, well, what else is there? And that's the same thought of you, just like them knowing you love you, and that not being the thing that saves them.
And Gabe being like such a huge testimony, like that. We will talk about that more. We talk about that more, of faith in knowing that God can change things and turn things around, and he's doing amazing.
So much better than where he was.
He's doing amazing. But I will say this, in me being a mom and me wanting to protect my kids, I didn't show you how to grieve properly. One, because I wasn't grieving properly, but I didn't show you how to, and I actually was showing you the wrong way to do things in my mind, thinking I'm protecting you. So even with Sylvia passing, I knew you were at school, you're across the country. I couldn't not tell you. But at the same time, I downplayed it. So like, I can't even believe I did this, where I literally was just like, hey, by the way.
Well, also, if I remember, I feel like this was the thing with your dad, but I don't remember with Sylvia, is neither time when you told me, you didn't tell me in that moment that they took their lives.
No, I didn't tell you how.
With Grandpa, you waited, and then I feel like with Sylvia, you told me, and it was like that following Sunday where you posted, and then I texted you, and I was just like, I found out she took her life, along with everybody on Instagram finding out that she took her life.
I couldn't tell you. It's like the thing that when I've used this analogy before, so I'm not gonna like harp on it, but when a child trips and falls, and a parent, the calmer you react to that, the calmer the child will be. And if you are nonchalant and like, oh, that's not that big of a deal, they will be, that's not that big of a deal. And growing up, even, I just remember like the things that my parents would just be like, that's not a big of a deal. We would go to the park. Everybody, let's go to the park today. Let's hang out outside all day at the park. That is a kid's dream. All day, a kid of the 80s, I will say. Not current kids. kid of the 80s dream. Let's go to the park all day. We packed snacks, we popped popcorn and put it in a big paper bag. Like, we were being evicted. And so we all had to get out of the house. But then at the end of the day of being at the park all day long, all of a sudden we had a new place to live. Like, hey, what? And because they celebrated it, like, oh, this isn't a big deal. We're just going to go to the park. Oh my gosh, look, we have this new house. Yay. We were like, yay. I literally have said before, like, I could write an entire book on everything I learned about marketing. I learned through being a mom. But that's how I did it.
I think, like, though, with the analogy, the key part when I hear you say it in our different podcasts is that when a kid trips.
I know, and you're not.
And me and Gabe were not grown because I was in high school. I'm not high school. I was in college. I wasn't 20 yet. But me and Gabe were not kids with those. And as a mom, I can't even imagine because I'm not in that headspace of we're still your babies. You're still our protector day in and day out. And so I don't imagine that's an easy flip.
And it doesn't flip. And for a lot of people, and I would say my mom included, it doesn't flip.
Yeah.
Like, I will never not be her little daughter.
Which is what parents are for. Like, that's not something that is expected. But I do think me and Gabe might have been able to process those two specific griefs a tiny bit differently if we were told either earlier or just told straight up what happened.
And if I had just allowed myself to grieve around you, like, at one point I was like, I don't know if my kids have seen me really, really cry.
I think the only time I've seen you, there might be a couple times, but the first moment that came to my head where I saw you start to grieve because I was just there was Kiki.
Yeah.
Because we found out in the same space.
Yeah.
So there was a moment of tears and shock and grief until you went upstairs to be by yourself. But in that initial moment when there was no time for you to protect me because I was sitting right there with you, you just felt the way that you needed to feel in that initial moment.
I'm glad you brought that up. That was a really hard death. And
that was during COVID too.
Yeah, that was the same year that my dad passed. And I remember just almost being angry that someone would spread a rumor like that. Because I had just talked to her the day before.
Yeah.
And her and I did a podcast together. Yeah. And her and I did a workshop together. And then the podcast that we did together was going to air 2 days after she passed.
Wow.
So it was like, I was like, my mom called and was like, did you hear? And I was like, did you hear? I was pissed, like, because I'm like, who did you hear from? And the internet and the interwebs and Facebook. I was like really upset. But yes, that it had happened. And what dawns on me, again, I think about legacy is people who die have plans. And I think about that a lot. Like, Kiki passed away. She, from what I understand, had obviously all these plans. She was writing a book. She was building a house. She had this podcast.
Wasn't she always traveling? Which was so
always
cool to me.
Traveling. Like, she's building a tiny house. She had all of these plans, and she's the type of person that would like have her journal. She'd be just going, and literally in the middle of her going, her literally in the morning doing her thing, her calendar, just doing Kiki, standing up and falling to the ground. And so I'm like, death does not care that you have a podcast, that you have a trip,
who you have in your life, like
that you're about to get married, that you're about to have a baby. Like, our plans do not, and the level of our planning as a planner do not exempt us.
It brings me to tears and pisses me off almost every single day. That as I told this to my mom recently, I was just like, God made me and put the ability in me to not only plan things, but also enjoy planning things. And then it's also in the same breath asking me to not plan and let him plan. Because he's the ultimate planner. And I'm just like, that is so backwards. Like, why would you give me a planner mindset and love organization and love putting my plan into place and then be like, now Malia, don't touch your plan. Don't touch your life. And I'm like, but you gave them to me to like. Like, if you could have just had me hate planning like a lot of people do, or having to-do lists. I could hate to-do lists. I make to-do lists all the time. And he's like, let it all go. And death and God, like, our plan does not matter to anything in the grand scheme of things.
I agree. We could probably talk for a long time. Thank you so much for joining us. I do want to leave us with this challenge of how do we grieve better, versus like, let me get away from grief, or let me move through it,
let
or
me
get done
avoid
with
it,
or like move past it. How do we grieve better in a way that is honoring that person, in the way that is, nurturing to ourselves, and maybe even flipping things, like I was saying earlier, of a song comes on and I'm so sad, versus a song comes on and I'm like happy that God just gave me that reminder.
And also honoring your emotions. I think the biggest thing with me with grief is pushing it away and moving past it. And so flipping the narrative and honoring that person, but also honoring yourself, and that you are a human going through grief. Yeah. And grief is something that we all go through day after day after day. So to be
and that
gracious
it will never
to yourself.
Fully go away.
Yeah.
Which is okay.
And so there's no expectations for that. But if you feel willing to, we would love to hear in the comments your answers to these questions. We want to know how these podcasts and questions have been impacting you. So please do in the comments, and we will see you next week for our next podcast. Our next
please
topic.
Subscribe.
Smash the subscribe.
Please pre-order.
Yes.
Through Her Eyes, and share with your friends.
Tell your pookies.
And we'll see you next time.
Bye. I love you, Mom, and loss is a hard thing, but that was long.
Someone's vacuuming.
It's okay. It's totally fine, because cleaning is also a good thing.